one that would echo through the Brown family like a thunderclap. "I think it's time to bring someone new into the family." Those were Kody Brown's words. Calm, calculated. Delivered at a dinner table that had seen its share of tension, but never anything quite like this. For a man who had already watched 3 marriages collapse, and his carefully built plural dream crumble, the idea of adding yet another wife wasn't just surprising, it was outrageous. And yet, in Kody's mind, it was the solution to everything. A fresh start, a chance to rewrite the narrative. But to everyone else, it was the final proof that Kody's hunger for control and attention knew no limits. Robyn's face told the story before her words did. The widening eyes, the sharp inhale, the barely contained disgust twisting her expression. She had defended Kody through years of scandal and heartbreak. She'd stood by him when Mary left, when Janelle walked away, when Christine's goodbye shattered the family's foundation. But this was different, because this wasn't about faith or family or rebuilding what they'd lost. It was about ego, about Kody chasing youth and validation at a time when his world was falling apart. And for what reason? Robyn finally asked, her voice trembling not with fear but fury. Kody's answer, delivered with unsettling confidence, made the room colder. "Attraction," he said simply. "It's only natural." That word, attraction, was a match thrown into gasoline. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about commitment. It was, in Robyn's eyes, the most superficial, selfish reasoning imaginable. And for the first time in their long, complicated marriage, she didn't just question him. She challenged him. "That's shallow, Kody. That's pig-headed." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. This wasn't just another argument in a marriage. This was a turning point. The kind that doesn't come with raised voices, but with quiet realizations. Robyn realized she no longer recognized the man sitting across from her. The man who once spoke of spiritual callings and divine unions was now talking about physical attraction like a midlife bachelor. And Kody, he saw perhaps for the first time, that Robyn's loyalty had limits. But if you think that's shocking, wait until you hear what happened next. Because this wasn't just an impulsive thought tossed out at dinner. No, Kody had been planning this. He'd been communicating with potential new wives, women who had reached out after seeing the show, women intrigued by the idea of joining a family that was already fractured. And one of those women, according to whispers, had already caught his attention in ways Robyn didn't yet know. And in that silence, as Robyn stared down the man she thought she knew, everything shifted. The cracks in their relationship, once hairline fractures, now spread like spider webs beneath the surface. This wasn't the end, but it was the beginning of something no one in the Brown family was prepared for. The question now wasn't whether a new wife would join the family, it was whether the family could survive the fallout if she did. For weeks, Robyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Kody was quieter than usual, retreating into his office for long hours, shutting the door during calls, and slipping his phone into his pocket the moment she entered the room. He claimed he was working on financial matters, dealing with property paperwork, or reconnecting with estranged children. Excuses that might have worked once. But not now. Not after the bombshell he had dropped about wanting a new wife. Robyn's instincts, the same ones that had kept her loyal, cautious, and often painfully forgiving, told her there was more beneath the surface. And she was right. One evening, curiosity got the better of her. As Kody showered, his phone buzzed on the dresser. The screen lit up with a name she didn't recognize. Hannah Az. The preview of the message was enough to make her chest tighten. "I've been thinking about our future. Are you sure Robyn is ready for this?" Robyn's breath caught. Our future. The words pulsed in her mind like a heartbeat. This wasn't just casual communication with a fan. This was emotional groundwork. A secret courtship already in motion. When Kody returned, she asked casually about his day, watching his body language with surgical precision. The slight hesitation before he answered. The way his eyes darted away for a split second. It was all there, confirmation without confession. And with every word he spoke, Robyn's fury built. Not just because of the betrayal, but because of the pattern. The same pattern she'd watched with Mary, Janelle, and Christine. Promises of transparency, followed by secrecy. Talk of family decisions, followed by unilateral choices. And now, as if history were determined to repeat itself, he was doing it again, this time with a stranger. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling as questions gnawed at her. Was she not enough? Had everything they endured together, the isolation, the criticism, the collapse of their once vast family, meant nothing? Or had Kody simply used her loyalty as a bridge to his next conquest? The bitter truth settled like a stone in her chest. This wasn't about adding to the family. It was about replacing what he'd lost. But we've only seen one side. Here's the truth no one expected. Kody wasn't just talking to one woman. In fact, there were three. Each conversation was different. Some flirtatious, some deeply spiritual, some laced with promises of shared destiny. He had even hinted to one that she might meet the family soon. As if Robyn were an obstacle to be overcome, not a partner to be considered. And in that moment of revelation, something inside Robyn shifted. The woman who had once been Kody's fiercest defender was now his quietest threat. She wasn't going to scream. She wasn't going to beg. Instead, she would watch, wait, and gather every piece of evidence she needed. Because this time, if Kody was going to destroy what little remained of the Brown family, he'd do it in full view of the world. And when he did, Robyn wouldn't be the one left holding the blame. News spreads quickly in the Brown family, faster than Kody ever anticipates. And this time, the whispers turned into waves. Within days of Robyn's discovery, Christine heard from a mutual friend that Kody was talking to women online. Janelle received a vague text from one of the adult kids asking if dad was serious about wife number 5. Even Mary, long distance from the family's drama, sent Robyn a cautious message. I heard something. Is it true? What started as a private delusion, Kody's secret plan to reinvent himself, was now a public scandal unfolding in real time. And for a man obsessed with control, there was no worse nightmare. Christine's reaction was the loudest. On her weekly live stream, usually reserved for cooking tips and parenting stories, she slipped in a pointed remark. Some people don't learn from losing 3 marriages. Some people think a new one will fix them. Fans knew exactly who she meant. The comment exploded across social media, reigniting old conversations about Kody's ego, his treatment of the women, and his inability to accept responsibility. Christine wasn't just venting. She was planting seeds. Seeds that would shape public perception before Kody even had a chance to speak. Janelle's approach was quieter but no less devastating. During a visit with one of their sons, she confided that she wasn't surprised. He's chasing relevance, she said softly, staring out the window. He's terrified of being alone. And in that single sentence, she summed up what many had long suspected. This wasn't about love or family. It was about Kody's fear. Fear of aging, fear of fading, fear of watching his once sprawling household shrink around him. Meanwhile, the children were angry. Not confused, not hurt, but furious. Many of them had barely forgiven their father for years of emotional distance, and now he was courting new wives instead of repairing old wounds. One daughter posted a cryptic message on Instagram. Some people replace broken things, others try to fix them. Fans flooded the comments, piecing together the puzzle. The narrative was shifting, and Kody was losing control of it with every passing hour. And if you think that's dramatic, wait until you hear what happened next. Because just when Kody needed Robyn's support the most, when his image was being shredded online, and his motives questioned by everyone he once called family, she vanished from public view. No statements, no interviews, no Instagram posts, just silence. And that silence spoke volumes. It wasn't loyalty anymore. It was strategy. Robyn knew that the more she distanced herself, the clearer it would become that this chaos was Kody's doing alone. As the family's reactions swirled and public opinion hardened, Kody's world began to shrink. Invitations to family events were rescinded. Group chats fell silent. Even some of the kids refused to answer his calls. The man who once stood as the head of a vast plural empire now found himself isolated by his wives, his children, and his own choices. And in that isolation, everything began to change. Because now, The real battle wasn't about a new wife. It was about saving what was left of the family he'd already broken. The tension had been building like a storm cloud over the Brown household. And one late afternoon, it finally broke. Robyn asked Kody to sit down. No cameras, no distractions, just the two of them at the long oak dining table, where they'd shared countless meals and weathered countless arguments. But this time felt different. There was no soft tone, no attempt to ease into the conversation. She looked him straight in the eyes and asked the question that had been clawing at her for weeks. How many women are you talking to? The silence that followed was more telling than any confession. Kody's jaw tightened, his fingers tapped restlessly against the table, and for a fleeting second, Robyn saw guilt flicker across his face. When he finally spoke, the words were slow and deliberate, as if rehearsed. A few conversations, nothing serious. But Robyn wasn't fooled. She had seen the messages, the photos exchanged, the language that went far beyond nothing serious. A few conversations, she repeated, her voice rising. You're discussing the future with strangers, while your present is falling apart. It wasn't anger that made her voice shake. It was heartbreak. Because despite everything, she had still believed she was different. That after Mary, Janelle and Christine, she would be the one who stayed, the one who mattered most. Kody, sensing the tide turning, shifted tactics. He spoke of loneliness, of feeling misunderstood, of wanting to rebuild what once was. He framed the idea of a new wife as a chance for renewal, a spiritual calling, not a betrayal. But Robyn wasn't buying it. This isn't about faith, she said coldly. This is about your ego. You're chasing youth, chasing validation, because you can't face what you've done to this family. Her words landed like blows, stripping away the justifications Kody had clung to. And if you think that confrontation was intense, wait until you hear what happened next. Because Robyn didn't just confront him about the women, she laid bare the reality of their crumbling relationship. She spoke about the nights she cried alone while he disappeared into his phone, about the growing distance between them, about how even their children had begun to see through the facade. We're not a family anymore, she whispered, tears brimming. We're just headlines waiting to happen. For a moment, Kody had no words. The man who always had an explanation, a sermon, a justification, stood silent. And in that silence, Robyn felt something inside her shift. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even anger. It was resignation. She realized that no amount of loyalty or patience could fix a man determined to repeat his mistakes. By the time the conversation ended, something fundamental between them had broken. Kody left the table without a word, retreating into the cold silence of his office, while Robyn sat alone, staring at the empty chair across from her. And in that quiet, she understood the truth she had avoided for too long. The man she had defended to the world was gone, and in his place stood someone she no longer recognized. But the story wasn't over, not even close, because what Robyn did next would change everything. The days after the confrontation were eerily quiet. Kody moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding eye contact, muttering excuses when the kids tried to talk to him, and spending long hours locked away in his office. Robyn, meanwhile, found herself pacing the same rooms with a growing sense of suffocation. Every wall, every photo, every memory felt like a reminder of a dream that had withered. She had defended this family for over a decade, endured criticism, ridicule and heartbreak, all because she believed in the vision she and Kody once shared. What now? That vision felt like a cruel joke. The more she replayed his words, the clearer it became. Kody wasn't trying to save their family. He was trying to reinvent himself, even if it meant erasing the past entirely. One evening, after another silent dinner, and another night of watching Kody scroll through his phone, Robyn broke. I can't do this anymore, she whispered to herself, her voice trembling in the empty kitchen. That simple sentence, spoken not to Kody, but to the quiet of her own thoughts, marked a turning point. It wasn't an impulsive reaction. It was the slow, painful realization that love alone couldn't fix betrayal, and loyalty couldn't survive in the shadow of deception. And if you think that moment was heavy, wait until you hear what happened next. Because instead of confronting Kody again, Robyn did something she had never done before. She started making plans without him. She reached out to Christine and Janelle, women she had once considered rivals, but now understood more deeply than ever. Their responses were compassionate and direct. "We've been where you are, and leaving was the hardest, best decision we ever made." Those words echoed in her mind for days, becoming a quiet anthem of strength. At the same time, Robyn began quietly organizing her life. She met with a financial advisor. She started exploring rental homes under her own name. She even began documenting evidence, screenshots, bank statements, and conversations, not to destroy Kody, but to protect herself if things turned ugly. It was a chillingly practical move, but one she knew was necessary. Because deep down, Robyn no longer trusted the man she once vowed to follow anywhere. Kody, oblivious to the storm gathering beneath the surface, continued his secret conversations. He spoke of fresh beginnings and shared futures with women who barely knew him, completely unaware that his current marriage was already slipping through his fingers. And when Robyn watched him smile at his phone one night, a hollow smile she hadn't seen directed at her in months, something inside her finally snapped. She realized she wasn't afraid of life without Kody anymore. She was afraid of a life with him, a life built on lies and half-truths. And in that silence, everything changed. Robyn wasn't just a bystander in Kody's story anymore. She was about to become the author of her own. In her next chapter, it wouldn't include a man who treated loyalty like a disposable convenience. But before she could walk away, one more bombshell was about to detonate, one that would make everything even more complicated. The bombshell didn't arrive as a dramatic confession or a teary apology. It came in the form of a single email. A message Robyn was never meant to see. She had been sorting through shared financial documents one morning when a notification popped up on the family's joint account. At first glance, it seemed routine. A property inquiry from an Arizona real estate firm. But as she read further, her hands began to tremble. The email wasn't about their existing assets. It was about a new property purchase Kody had initiated. And the name listed alongside his, Hannah J., the same woman from the text messages. Robyn's breath caught. This wasn't just emotional betrayal anymore. This was premeditated. Kody wasn't fantasizing about a new wife. He was building a life with one. The property, a sprawling 3-acre lot on the outskirts of Flagstaff, was described as a private family home suitable for new beginnings. That phrase repeated in her mind over and over, new beginnings. For weeks he had told her he was reconnecting with his faith and repairing their foundation. In reality, he was preparing to leave her behind entirely. When Kody returned home that evening, Robyn was waiting for him in the living room. The email printed out and folded neatly on the coffee table. "Do you want to explain this?" she asked, her voice icy calm. Kody froze mid-step, the color draining from his face. For the first time, he didn't even try to deny it. "I was just exploring options," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. But Robyn wasn't fooled. "Options?" she repeated. "You're buying land with a woman you met online. That's not an option, Kody. That's a plan. And if you think that confrontation was explosive, wait until you hear what happened next." Because Robyn wasn't the only one who saw the email. One of their children, passing by, overheard the argument and quietly took a photo of the document. Within hours, it was shared in a family group chat. And from there, the news spread like wildfire. Christine called within the day. Janelle followed minutes later. Both were furious but unsurprised. "He hasn't changed," Christine said bluntly. "He'll burn down everything for his ego." The fallout was immediate. The children who had already distanced themselves now cut off contact entirely. Even Mary, who had long since stepped away from the family, posted a cryptic message online. "Some bridges are burned, others are demolished." Social media exploded with speculation, and fan forums lit up with outrage. For years, viewers had watched Kody blame his wives for the collapse of his marriages. Now, the evidence was irrefutable. He wasn't just moving on, he was replacing them. And in that silence after the storm, Robyn felt something new. Not sadness, not anger, but clarity. She finally saw Kody not as the man she'd fallen in love with, but as the architect of his own downfall. The dream they'd built was gone, buried under secrets and selfishness. And now, as the pieces of their life scattered around her, one question burned brighter than all the rest. Would she walk away before he erased her too? The answer was coming, and it would change everything. It didn't take long for the world outside the Brown family to find out about Kody's latest betrayal. Within days of the leaked email hitting a family group chat, screenshots surfaced on Reddit, Facebook fan pages, and sister wives forums. The headline practically wrote itself: Kody Brown's secret property deal with new woman exposed. And just like that, the internet ignited. Thousands of comments poured in within hours. Outrage, disbelief, mockery. Fans who had once sympathized with Kody now turned on him completely. The narrative was no longer about a struggling polygamist trying to keep his family together. It was about a man willing to betray everyone who ever loved him for one more shot at control. The backlash wasn't confined to social media. News outlets picked up the story. Talk shows dissected it, and YouTube creators flooded the algorithm with videos titled things like Kody's final betrayal and Robyn's revenge is coming. Every clip of Kody talking about family unity and spiritual calling was now being replayed against the backdrop of this new betrayal. It wasn't just hypocrisy. It was humiliation, and it was playing out on a global stage. And if you think that public shaming was brutal, wait until you hear what happened next. Because even TLC, the network that had built a franchise around Kody's life, couldn't stay silent. According to leaks from insiders, executives were deeply concerned about the optics and were reconsidering how to present Kody in future seasons. There were even whispers that Robyn might be offered her own spin-off, focusing on her journey of rebuilding and reclaiming independence. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted. Kody wasn't the star anymore. He was the scandal. Inside the family, the ripple effects were just as intense. Some of the older children publicly unfollowed Kody on social media, while others posted messages about choosing peace over toxicity. Christine went a step further, using the surge in attention to promote her new book, one that promised unfiltered truths about the man behind the camera. Janelle, usually quiet and measured, spoke out in a rare interview saying, "At some point you stop trying to fix someone who doesn't want to change." Each statement chipped away at Kody's carefully curated image, leaving little more than a hollow shell of the man viewers once knew. Robyn watched it all unfold from a distance. She didn't need to speak. The world was doing it for her. For years, people had labeled her the villain, accusing her of manipulating Kody and breaking up the family. But now, the spotlight had shifted. The villain was standing alone, clutching his excuses while the world laughed at his downfall. And in that silence, Robyn felt a strange, unexpected sense of relief. She wasn't alone anymore. The truth was out, and the world finally saw Kody for who he truly was. But as the backlash reached its peak, another storm was forming, one that would hit even harder. Because while the public was busy tearing down Kody's reputation, someone else was preparing to strike where it hurt most: his finances. And that battle would make everything that came before look like child's play. If the public humiliation had shaken Kody, the financial reckoning nearly destroyed him. It began quietly. A letter from a law firm addressed to his accountant, then another, this time from Robyn's attorney. And then the real blow: a court summons. Robyn wasn't just preparing to leave, she was preparing to fight. After years of being the silent partner, the supportive wife, the one who held the family together, she was now stepping into a new role: adversary. And this wasn't about revenge. This was about reclaiming what was rightfully hers. The documents were precise and devastating. Robyn was demanding a full forensic audit of every joint account, property, investment, and business venture Kody had ever touched, including the newly discovered land he had tried to purchase with Hannah. She claimed financial deception, mismanagement of shared funds, and intentional concealment of assets. It wasn't just a divorce filing. It was a financial assault designed to expose everything Kody had hidden in the shadows. And if you think that's intense, wait until you hear what happened next. Christine and Janelle, who had long suspected Kody of siphoning money during their marriages, quietly reached out to Robyn's legal team. They offered documents, old emails, and financial statements that painted a damning picture. Money meant for family trusts diverted to personal accounts, land investments made without consent, and suspicious wire transfers tied to shell LLCs. One particularly explosive discovery revealed that Kody had used family funds to pay for trips and gifts connected to the women he'd been talking to, including Hannah. That revelation turned an already ugly legal dispute into a potential criminal investigation. The children, too, were drawn into the battle. Some provided testimony about being denied financial support for school or housing, while Kody spent lavishly on his own projects. Others shared text messages and emails that hinted at years of manipulation. With every new piece of evidence, Kody's position weakened. His once carefully constructed empire, the businesses, the land, the brand, was now a fragile house of cards swaying under the weight of his own greed. And in that silence, as Kody sat across from his legal team reviewing hundreds of pages of damning evidence, reality hit him harder than any headline ever could. He was no longer the patriarch in control of his plural kingdom. He was a man on the brink, fighting for his reputation, his finances, and his future. The bravado that once defined him was gone, replaced by quiet panic and sleepless nights. Meanwhile, Robyn remained composed. For the first time in years, she felt power, not the power to hurt, but the power to protect. This wasn't about punishing Kody, it was about building a life free from his chaos, ensuring that she and her children would never again be at the mercy of his reckless decisions. But even as the financial war escalated, one final twist was waiting. A revelation buried deep in those financial records that would shake the Brown family one last time, and leave Kody with nowhere left to hide. The deeper Robyn's legal team dug, the darker the financial labyrinth became. At first it was small inconsistencies, missing receipts, unexplained withdrawals, vague business expenses. But then, buried beneath layers of shell companies and side accounts, they found something no one had anticipated. 3 hidden bank accounts, each under a different LLC name, each receiving regular deposits over the last 5 years. The total balance, nearly $1.2 million. And none of it had been disclosed to Robyn, the family, or even the IRS filings attached to their shared businesses. This wasn't just reckless money management. It was deliberate concealment. The discovery hit Robyn like a physical blow. She had lived through years of sacrifice, cutting expenses, selling personal items, even downsizing family plans to help with financial struggles, all while Kody secretly funneled money into private accounts. Worse still, some of the transactions were tied directly to names she recognized: travel agencies, luxury resorts, and jewelry stores, many coinciding with the same dates he'd been messaging Hannah and the other women. It was no longer speculation. Kody had been funding his double life right under her nose. And if you think that's shocking, wait until you hear what happened next. Because when confronted with the evidence, Kody didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look ashamed. Instead, he tried to justify it. That money was for future family investments, he claimed, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. But Robyn wasn't buying it. "Future family?" she shot back. "You mean the one you were building without us?" Word of the hidden accounts spread quickly, leaking to the media within days. Overnight, headlines shifted from betrayal to potential fraud. Legal experts began speculating on talk shows about the possibility of criminal charges. Fans who had once been merely outraged were now calling for investigations. TLC producers, scrambling to contain the damage, paused filming and demanded emergency meetings about the show's future. Kody's world, already fragile, was crumbling by the hour. Meanwhile, Christine and Janelle saw the revelation as vindication. For years, that's fine, they had suspected financial deceit, but lacked proof. Now, with documented evidence in the public domain, they began exploring the possibility of reopening parts of their divorce settlements. If Kody had hidden money during those separations, they might be entitled to significant portions of it, a move that could drain the very accounts he tried so hard to conceal. And in the middle of the chaos, Robyn made a decision that shocked everyone, even herself. She authorized her lawyers to subpoena records from every company Kody had ever been involved in, pushing the investigation beyond their marriage and into his entire financial empire. It was a bold, aggressive move, one that signaled this was no longer a family dispute. It was a full-scale legal reckoning. As the evidence mounted and the legal storm intensified, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about betrayal or broken promises anymore. It was about accountability, And for the first time in his life, Kody Brown was running out of places to hide. But the final blow, the one that would change everything forever, was still to come. And when it landed, it would leave the Brown family shattered beyond repair. The storm that had been gathering for months finally broke in a single courtroom. A sterile chamber filled with reporters, cameras clicking, and a tension so thick it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Kody Brown, once the charismatic patriarch of a sprawling polygamous family, now sat at the defendant's table with his lawyers, his face pale and drawn. Across from him sat Robyn, no longer the devoted wife, but a composed, steely figure who had transformed into something Kody never anticipated. His greatest adversary. And beside her, in a moment that stunned even the most cynical observers, were Christine and Janelle, united not by bitterness, but by purpose. They were no longer rivals. They were allies in the pursuit of justice. The proceedings were brutal. Robyn's attorneys presented page after page of evidence. The secret property purchase with Hannah, the hidden accounts totaling over $1 million, the diverted family funds, and the manipulated business filings. Every exhibit stripped away another layer of Kody's carefully constructed persona. The courtroom, once silent, erupted into gasps as each revelation landed. At one point, a forensic accountant took the stand and testified that Kody had intentionally concealed assets for personal gain, a statement that shifted the tone from civil dispute to potential criminal liability. And if you think that was the climax, wait until you hear what happened next. Because just as Kody's legal team prepared to defend the financial decisions as misunderstandings, a new piece of evidence surfaced. A series of emails between Kody and Hannah, discussing plans to transfer joint funds overseas. It was the smoking gun no one expected, and it sent a shockwave through the courtroom. Even Kody's own lawyers looked stunned. The judge's expression hardened, and the murmurs in the gallery turned into a chorus of disbelief. Outside the courthouse, the public spectacle reached fever pitch. Protesters gathered with signs reading "Justice for the Wives" and "Accountability for Kody." News channels ran 24-hour coverage, and social media exploded with hashtags like #KodyExposed and #SisterWivesFinale. The empire Kody had built, the TV fame, the fan base, the image of spiritual leadership, was disintegrating in real time. Inside, Robyn remained calm, even as her world turned upside down. For her, this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about liberation. From manipulation, from lies, from a man who had weaponized faith and family for his own gain. Christine and Janelle felt it too. They weren't just witnesses to Kody's downfall, they were survivors stepping into a future no longer defined by his control. And in that silence, as the judge adjourned the session and the courtroom emptied, Kody sat motionless, staring at the polished wood of the defense table. Everything he had built, the marriages, the money, the empire, was gone. What remained was a legacy of betrayal, and a family united, not by love, but by the scars he had left behind. Yet one question lingered. Heavier than the verdict itself, was this truly the end of Kody Brown's reign, or just the beginning of his reckoning? The answer, as always, will come not from his words, but from what those he betrayed decide to do next. And that, perhaps, is the one thing even Kody can't control. The courtroom was empty now. The cameras were gone, the reporters had filed their stories, and the echo of the gavel's final strike still lingered in the air like the last clap of thunder. After a violent storm, Kody Brown sat alone on the cold wooden bench, staring into the void, his reflection distorted in the polished floor beneath him. For years he had been the center of gravity in a universe that revolved entirely around him. 4 wives, 18 children, a nationally televised reality empire built on the illusion of unity. But now, in the aftermath of betrayal, lawsuits, and revelations that exposed every lie he had ever told, Kody faced the one thing he had always feared most: irrelevance. The legal battle wasn't over. The judge's ruling that day wasn't a final verdict, but a preliminary decision, one that ordered a comprehensive forensic review of all his financial records, property holdings, and business dealings. It also granted Robyn, Christine, and Janelle the right to subpoena additional documents and pursue restitution if they could prove financial fraud. In simple terms, the walls were closing in. Kody's lawyers urged him to settle quietly, to negotiate a deal that would minimize the damage. But Kody, driven by the same pride that had fueled his downfall, refused. "I won't let them destroy me," he muttered under his breath, though deep down he knew they already had. And if you think that's the end of the story, wait until you hear what happened next. Because while Kody was sinking deeper into legal quicksand, the women he once controlled were finally learning how to live without him, and how to thrive. Robyn, once the most loyal and controversial figure in Kody's orbit, had undergone a transformation that even she hadn't anticipated. The woman who had built her entire adult life around pleasing and protecting Kody was now fiercely independent, negotiating business deals, meeting with lawyers, and speaking openly to the press about her experience. She launched a foundation dedicated to helping women leave controlling relationships, using her own story as both a warning and an inspiration. "I believed loyalty was strength," she told a crowd at her first public appearance since the trial. "But real strength is knowing when to walk away." Christine, whose departure years earlier had been the first domino to fall, was riding a wave of public support. Her book, a deeply personal memoir chronicling her journey from isolation to independence, had become a bestseller. Fans hailed her as the survivor matriarch, and her online presence exploded as she shared stories about healing, co-parenting, and building a new life on her terms. "I don't hate Kody," she said in a widely shared interview. "I pity him, because he had everything and chose to throw it away." Janelle, ever the strategist, took a more practical approach. She quietly began reclaiming financial assets she'd helped build during the marriage, reinvesting them into real estate and family trusts for her children. But perhaps her most powerful move was the one no one saw coming. She began working with Robyn and Christine on a joint business venture, a women-led media company aimed at telling stories of resilience, betrayal, and rebirth. What began as a conversation over coffee quickly grew into a multi-million-dollar project backed by several investors. And the irony wasn't lost on anyone. The women Kody had underestimated were now building an empire without him. But the real reckoning wasn't happening in courtrooms or boardrooms. It was happening in the hearts of Kody's children. Some had already cut contact completely, refusing to speak to him after the financial revelations. Others agreed to meet, but only on their terms. One by one, they confronted him, not as children seeking approval, but as adults demanding accountability. The most painful confrontation came from his eldest son, who met him in a quiet coffee shop far from the glare of cameras. "Do you even know how many birthdays you missed?" he asked. "Do you remember how many times you promised to show up and didn't?" Kody tried to explain, to justify, to shift blame onto the circumstances, the marriages, the pressure. But his son wasn't interested in excuses. "You weren't a father," he said softly. "You were a man with a camera and an ego." He left without another word, and Kody sat there long after the coffee turned cold, realizing he couldn't fix what had been broken for so long. Even the younger children, once fiercely loyal, were pulling away. They had seen too much, heard too much. The image of their father was no longer that of a provider or protector. It was of a man whose choices had caused irreparable damage. Some refused to attend family events if he was present. Others communicated through lawyers. The dream of a united plural family, the very dream that had once defined Kody's life, was dead. And in that silence, something began to shift inside Kody himself. Alone in the massive house that once echoed with laughter and chaos, he was left with nothing but the weight of his decisions. Nights were the hardest. He would sit in the dark living room, staring at old family photos, Christine smiling beside him, Janelle holding their newborn Mary, laughing during a family trip, Robyn looking at him with unwavering trust. One by one, those moments played like scenes from a life he had destroyed with his own hands. For the first time he allowed himself to feel something he had buried for years. Regret, not just for the affairs, the lies, or the financial betrayals, but for the arrogance that convinced him he could treat people as disposable, and still be loved. He realized that every betrayal had cost him more than money or reputation. It had cost him connection. And now, the man who had once boasted about his big, beautiful family was completely and utterly alone. Meanwhile, the world watched the fall of Kody Brown like a real-life tragedy unfolding in slow motion. Documentaries were commissioned. Podcasts dissected every revelation. Even TLC announced a new special, Sister Wives: The Reckoning, which promised never-before-seen footage and exclusive interviews with the women. Public opinion was nearly unanimous. Kody had brought this upon himself. Yet, a small but vocal group of fans still clung to the belief that redemption was possible. They flooded social media with messages urging forgiveness, praying for reconciliation. But forgiveness wasn't the point anymore. For Christine, Janelle, and Robyn, closure didn't mean letting Kody back in. It meant building a life where his choices no longer defined them. And for the children, healing meant accepting that the father they once needed was not the man he had become. And yet, despite everything, the story didn't feel finished. There was no tidy conclusion, no perfectly wrapped ending, because deep down, every member of the Brown family knew the wounds ran deeper than legal battles or financial settlements. They were wounds of trust, of love betrayed, of years that could never be reclaimed. And wounds like that don't heal with verdicts. They linger. One evening, long after the cameras had stopped rolling, Robyn visited the now abandoned Coyote Pass property, the land that was once meant to house the Brown family's grand dream. The wind howled through the empty fields, carrying with it memories of laughter, arguments, and promises that were never kept. She stood there for a long time, staring into the horizon. And in that silence, she whispered, "We were supposed to grow old here." The reckoning had come. The truth was out. The empire was gone. And yet, one question still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Was this truly the end of the Brown family's story, or just the beginning of a new one written without Kody at its center? For now, the answer remains unwritten, hidden somewhere in the choices they have yet to make, the forgiveness they may never offer, and the futures they are only just beginning to build. But one thing is certain, the man who once believed he controlled everything has finally learned the most painful lesson of all. No matter how powerful you think you are, no matter how untouchable you believe yourself to be, when you betray the people who built your world, the fall is always harder, the reckoning always closer, and the silence that follows is always deafening. And in that silence, the world waits, watching, wondering, and asking the question that will haunt Kody Brown for the rest of his life. Will he ever truly face what he's done, or will he spend the rest of his days running from the ghost of the family he destroyed? The courtroom battle had ended, but the story was far from over. In the weeks that followed the explosive hearings, the Brown family's world existed in a strange kind of limbo, one part aftermath, one part rebirth. Kody had retreated almost completely from public life, his once booming confidence replaced by a quiet, brooding resentment. He avoided cameras, declined interviews, and refused to comment on the ongoing investigations into his finances. For a man who had spent over a decade building a brand on visibility and control, this withdrawal was more than uncharacteristic. It was desperate. He had lost his family, his credibility, and most of the wealth he'd tried so hard to hoard. What remained was a man stripped of his power, left to confront the consequences he had spent years denying. But while Kody was hiding from the world, the rest of the family was stepping into the light. Robyn's transformation was the most dramatic. Once painted as the villain of the Sister Wives saga, the manipulative newcomer who disrupted the family's balance, she was now a symbol of resilience. Every public appearance she made was deliberate and poised. She spoke not with anger, but with clarity, recounting the years she'd spent sacrificing her happiness for a man who never valued it. Her honesty resonated deeply with audiences. Interviews she gave about emotional abuse and financial manipulation went viral, and her name became associated with empowerment rather than controversy. Slowly the narrative shifted. Robyn wasn't the enabler anymore. She was the survivor. Christine and Janelle were thriving in their own ways too. Christine's book tour sold out across the country, with fans lining up for hours to hear her speak about reclaiming her life. She became a sought-after speaker for women's organizations, and even signed a deal for a new docuseries, exploring life after polygamy. Janelle, ever the strategist, grew their media company into a powerhouse, partnering with other former reality TV personalities to create a platform centered on female-led storytelling. The company's first documentary, an expose on financial abuse in religious communities, was already in production. The women had turned their shared pain into purpose, and in doing so, they found not just healing but power. And yet, despite all their success, the wounds remained. Family events were still fractured, birthdays awkward and incomplete. Some of the children wanted nothing to do with their father, while others wrestled with conflicting feelings: love, resentment, confusion. Therapy sessions became a regular part of their lives, both individually and as a group. They spoke openly about abandonment, betrayal, and the long-term impact of living in a home built on shifting lies. It was painful, often raw, but it was also progress. The Browns were no longer pretending everything was fine. They were confronting the damage head-on. Kody, meanwhile, was unraveling in slow motion. His financial empire, once the backbone of his confidence, was crumbling under the weight of lawsuits, audits, and mounting legal fees. Several of his businesses dissolved under scrutiny, and others were seized or frozen pending investigation. Friends and acquaintances, who had once flocked to him for influence and opportunities, now kept their distance. Even the few women he had been communicating with cut off contact once the details of his financial deception became public. The man who had built his identity on being desired, respected, and obeyed now found himself utterly alone, and for the first time in his life, he couldn't blame anyone else. And if you think that was the lowest point, wait until you hear what happened next. One morning, months after the court's preliminary rulings, Kody received a letter from the IRS. The hidden accounts, the offshore transactions, the undeclared income, all of it had triggered a federal investigation. This wasn't a civil dispute anymore. It was a potential criminal case. Panic set in as he read the words over and over: under investigation, possible charges, substantial penalties. The reality that he might not just lose his money but his freedom sent him into a spiral he couldn't escape. He spent days holed up at home, refusing calls, ignoring legal advice, consumed by a fear he had never known before. Meanwhile, Robyn was preparing for one final confrontation, not in court, not on camera, but face to face. She reached out to Kody and asked to meet, not for reconciliation, but for closure. They met at a small cafe on the edge of town, far from the photographers and gossip blogs. When Kody arrived, he looked older, smaller, defeated. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet bitterness. They sat in silence for several minutes before Robyn finally spoke. "I don't hate you," she said softly. "I just don't recognize you anymore." Kody didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply stared down at his coffee, hands trembling slightly. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he murmured. Robyn shook her head. "That's the problem," she replied. "You never mean it, but you always do it." That conversation lasted less than 15 minutes, but it was the most honest one they had ever shared. Robyn left without promises or anger. She felt lighter than she had in years. Kody, on the other hand, sat there long after she was gone, staring at the empty chair across from him. For the first time, he understood that no apology, no gesture, no last-minute redemption arc could undo what he had done. The bridges were gone, the family was gone, and the man he used to be was gone with them. Life moved on without him. Christine's docu-series premiered to record-breaking ratings. Janelle's media company announced a major partnership with a streaming service. Robyn launched a scholarship program for single mothers leaving polygamous communities. The children grew closer to one another, finding strength in their shared scars. They began to create new traditions, ones that didn't revolve around their father's presence or approval. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, they built something Kody could never destroy, a future free from his shadow. And yet, even in that newfound peace, one question lingered in the hearts of everyone involved. Could there ever be forgiveness? Could the man who had caused so much pain ever truly make amends? Or was his story destined to end here, not with redemption, but with regret? The answer remained unclear, suspended in the space between what was and what might still be. As months turned into years, the sister wives saga faded from the front pages. New scandals replaced old ones, new shows captured public attention, But for those who had lived it, the story would never truly be over. It lived on in the lessons learned, the boundaries drawn, the resilience forged in fire. It lived on in the strength of the women who refused to be broken, in the children who chose healing over hatred, and even in the man who, stripped of everything, was left to face himself for the first time. And in that silence, the same silence that once followed every betrayal, every revelation, every courtroom bombshell, the world waited, not for another scandal, or another show, but for a single unanswered question that still lingered over the ashes of the Brown family's empire. Could Kody Brown ever change, or was this the final chapter in a story defined by his own destruction? The answer, like so much else in their tangled history, would depend not on what he said, but on what he did next. And for the first time in his life, the choice and the weight of it was entirely his. The months following the collapse of the Brown Empire unfolded in slow motion, as if time itself was trying to absorb the weight of what had happened. The once famous family that had lived under the unrelenting glare of reality television had now scattered into different lives, separate paths and private battles. Yet, the ripples of Kody's actions continued to spread, shaping futures, hardening hearts, and forcing everyone, including Kody himself, to confront the unhealed wounds left behind. There was no reunion on the horizon, no cheerful tell-all to wrap things up. This was not a story of reconciliation, it was a story of reckoning, rebuilding, and the uneasy coexistence of pain and progress. For Kody, life had narrowed to a claustrophobic routine. The mansion that once buzzed with chaos now felt cavernous and silent. The walls, covered with framed photos of family trips and long-forgotten celebrations, seemed to mock him. Each image told a story of people who had once believed in him, trusted him, loved him, people he had pushed away with arrogance and betrayal. He avoided looking at them now. The few friends who still answered his calls spoke in careful tones, their pity thinly veiled. And every time the phone rang, his stomach knotted, fearing it might be his lawyer, with news of yet another legal complication. The IRS investigation had intensified. Auditors uncovered more discrepancies, more hidden accounts, and more evidence of deliberate evasion. What had begun as a civil financial dispute now loomed as a potential criminal case with severe consequences. Meetings with attorneys stretched late into the night, each one darker than the last. They spoke of plea deals, sentencing guidelines, and restitution agreements that could drain whatever remained of his fortune. For the first time in his life, Kody understood that the law, unlike his family, could not be manipulated, guilt-tripped, or charmed into forgiveness. The consequences were coming, whether he was ready or not. And if you think that's where his suffering ended, wait until you hear what came next. Because even the small threads of hope he clung to, reconciliation with a few children, a quiet life away from the spotlight, began to fray. A scheduled visit with two of his younger kids was abruptly cancelled. They had decided they weren't ready. It's too soon, their message read. The words cut deeper than any courtroom ruling. Too soon. It had been years, but the damage was still fresh, the wounds still raw. Kody tried to console himself by saying time would heal things, but deep down, he knew time could only heal what was wanted to be healed. And for many of his children, the desire simply wasn't there. Meanwhile, the rest of the family flourished in ways that seemed almost poetic. Christine's docuseries was nominated for multiple awards, hailed as one of the most powerful accounts of resilience in modern reality television. Janelle's media company expanded into publishing, releasing memoirs and self-help books by women who had left controlling religious groups. Robyn, whose foundation for women escaping toxic relationships had already helped hundreds, partnered with several major nonprofits, turning her advocacy into a national movement. They were no longer Kody's wives. They were leaders, entrepreneurs, advocates, and they no longer existed in his shadow. The children, too, were beginning to heal, though the journey was uneven. Some chose to cut Kody out of their lives entirely, focusing instead on building families of their own, determined not to repeat the mistakes of their parents. Others maintained limited contact, exchanging polite messages on birthdays and holidays, but keeping emotional distance. A few, the ones who still wrestled with love and resentment in equal measure, attended therapy to untangle their feelings. They wanted closure but didn't know if closure was possible. They wanted peace but didn't know if it was deserved. The absence of answers left many of them suspended in a kind of emotional limbo, neither fully estranged nor reconciled. Kody often wondered if he had crossed a point of no return. Late at night, he would scroll through old family photos on his phone. Christine laughing with the kids during a camping trip. Janelle decorating a new home. Robyn holding his hand at a premiere. For a fleeting moment he would convince himself that maybe, just maybe, he could fix it all. Maybe he could apologize deeply enough, change profoundly enough, to earn a second chance. But those thoughts were always followed by the same crushing realization. Apologies meant nothing without trust. And trust, once shattered, is not easily rebuilt. He had not just broken promises. He had broken people. And yet in that bleakness, a strange sort of clarity began to form. For the first time in decades, Kody had no one to control, no narrative to manage, no audience to impress. All that remained was himself, flawed, disgraced, alone, and the uncomfortable truth of who he had become. Slowly, painfully, he began therapy, not as a tactic for reconciliation, but as an act of survival. The sessions were brutal. They forced him to confront the narcissism that had driven his choices, the insecurity that had fueled his need for control, and the fear that had disguised itself as faith. The process was humiliating and humbling, but for the first time it was real. Months turned into a year. The legal battles dragged on, the investigations continued, and the family moved further into their new lives. Yet something unexpected began to happen. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, but acknowledgement. One of his daughters sent him a letter, not to reconnect, but to say she hoped he was working on himself. A son texted him on Father's Day, just 2 words. Still trying. They weren't gestures of reconciliation, but they were signs that healing, however slow, was still possible. And in that fragile space between despair and redemption, a new chapter began to emerge. Not one of grand gestures or sweeping apologies, but of quiet accountability. Kody started volunteering with organizations focused on financial literacy and fraud prevention, using his story as a cautionary tale. He donated a portion of his remaining assets to Robyn's foundation, not for praise, but because it felt like the first unselfish thing he had done in years. It didn't erase the past. Nothing could, but it was a start. A small, stumbling step toward becoming someone different. Still, the question that hovered over everything, the question that had defined the Brown family for so long, remained unanswered. Could they ever truly be a family again? Or was their shared history destined to remain just that, history? The answer lay not in courtrooms or interviews or public statements, but in time. Time might never fully heal the wounds, but it could soften the edges. Time might not rebuild trust, but it could create space for understanding. And time, above all, could reveal whether Kody's remorse was real, or just another chapter in a long story of self-deception. The cameras were gone now. The contracts expired. The spotlight dimmed. What remained were people. Flawed, scarred, but still standing. And as they each stepped into futures that no longer revolved around one man's ego, they carried with them the lessons of a past they would never forget. The empire had fallen. The family had shattered. But from the ruins something unexpected was taking shape. Something more honest, more human, and maybe, just maybe, more whole. And as Kody stood on the porch of his empty home one quiet evening, watching the sunset fade over the Arizona horizon, he whispered a question into the wind. A question meant for no one but himself. Can I ever be worthy of them again? There was no answer, only silence. But for the first time, that silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a beginning.